Welcome. I'm Steve Crowley with the Vermont Sierra Club, and welcome to our ongoing series of Wednesday night community conversations. Tonight we've got a great discussion lined up, and we're very pleased to have Mark Kresowik from National Sierra Club joining us, and Jack Hanson, who's a Burlington City Councilor. And our focus is on building electrification, a key part of the strategy of electrifying everything to reduce our fossil fuel dependency. So with that, let me just pass it right on to Mark. Before that, I'll just let everybody know our format is to hear from Mark and Jack about the work they're working on for the first 25 or 30 minutes or so, and then we will open it up to questions and discussion. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll generally hang on until halfway through for those. And otherwise, we do request that people keep their mics on mute, and we'll open the discussion when we get there. So thanks. So Mark, let's start with you. What's your perspective on building electrification?
Thanks very much, Steve, and thank you to everyone who's joining on this wonderful Wednesday evening. So I'm Mark Kresowik, the Deputy Regional Director for the Sierra Club. I manage and support our teams primarily in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, and also co-manage the Sierra Club's building electrification work across the country. So we can start at the very basic, right? Burning fossil fuels to heat and run our appliances in buildings is the third largest source of climate pollution in the economy. In Vermont, it's the second largest source, and throughout New England. We are, every gas heater, every gas stove, propane, fuel oil is contributing not just to climate disruption, but also to extremely unhealthy conditions inside our homes, especially now during COVID, as we spend more and more time at home, particularly with our children, as I know very well. We're still all virtual school here. We've really come to realize how important a healthy, safe, affordable home and energy system is. When people are having are threatened with your utilities being shut off when they're stuck at home. We really can't have, we need healthier, safer, more affordable homes. And the key to that is ensuring that fossil fuels are leaving our buildings. There are incredibly superior, efficient, cost-effective technologies that are available today to help us do this. We can heat and power our homes right now with cold climate heat pumps for heating and cooling purposes, water as well as space. Induction stoves, the latest, greatest technology for cooking, is far superior, faster, and much safer and healthier than cooking with gas. I have an induction stove, particularly for the safety benefits, as well as the superior performance when it comes to heating up food and being more precise about cooking. We've also seen the incredible damages and safety problems with gas. Just neighboring Massachusetts, many of you are probably familiar with the Merrimack Valley explosions, where an entire neighborhood was decimated when the gas system exploded, killing a person, causing untold damage, and putting people out of being able to heat and cook for months on end. In this country, there is an explosion or a leak in the gas system that sends somebody to the hospital every 4 days. The gas system, fossil fuels in our buildings are unsafe, they're unhealthy, they're causing climate disruption, and they're too expensive. So the solution is to, again, move to these superior electric appliances to get the gas, propane, fuel oil out of our homes. It's cheaper, safer, healthier, and better in every respect. The question is how to do that. It's not easy, right? Most people don't think about their appliances for heating or cooling or cooking until they break. Right? The vast majority of replacements of appliances when they break, and that's an emergency moment, right? And you're not going in there thinking about what's the best technology? What are my options? If I've got to make changes to my house, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna put in what I had before. So that's a huge barrier that we have to overcome to help people figure out how do we get ahead of this? How do we become proactive to address these challenges? When it comes to new construction, it's incredibly easy, right? It's actually cheaper to build a new home all electric than it is to connect to the gas system or put in fossil fuels. So new construction is an easy one. We should just be building all electric right from the get-go. It's cheaper and easier to do. When it comes to the gas, fuel, oil, and propane in our existing buildings, we have to initiate proactive steps to engage whole comprehensive retrofit programs, to be able to go into a home, particularly those who are suffering right now and struggling to afford energy and housing, so affordable housing, low-income families, to get proactive and help families, again, with this comprehensive retrofit approach to ensure that we're addressing health and safety repairs, that we're fixing anything like mold, broken windows, leaking roofs, asbestos, lead, and fixing in the envelope of a home, that we are ensuring that's as efficient and weatherized as possible, and that it's switching over to electric appliance. Sometimes that requires upgrading of wiring and to ensure that those new efficient appliances can be installed. At the same time, when we're in a home, we have the opportunity to also make sure that that home is ready for putting solar panel on the roofs, hooking up an electric vehicle. This kind of comprehensive retrofit approach is being discussed in the Vermont legislature right now. But there's also the opportunity for city action in places like Burlington, where the city council, as Jack is going to speak in a moment, are looking proactively at how to do this. How do we make sure that we aren't hooking any new buildings up to the gas system or up there or heating with oil and propane, and that we are starting to figure out how to move our entire building system off of these dirty, destructive, dangerous fossil fuels. So I'm going to stop there for a moment, see if Rob, Steve, if there's anything else you want me to add before passing it over to Zach.
Well, why don't we pass it over to Jack? Why don't you take it away, Jack? What's going on in Burlington?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for kind of outlining the issue from a high level. And even as you can tell from what Mark presented, even without going too far into depth about the climate crisis and the importance of decarbonizing buildings for that reason, there's still a number of other really important reasons to move buildings away from fossil fuels. And then on top of all of the reasons that Mark highlighted, we have this enormous climate crisis that we're facing and need to rapidly transform away from fossil fuels for that reason alone. So there's so many reasons to do this. And I think one of the important things to recognize is that we can't wait. We can't kind of wait for someone else to go first. I think it's incumbent upon all of us in our own communities to push this forward, and also push at the state and federal level, but not to simply wait for the state and federal level to take action. This is going to be a transition that's going to have to take place in every single community. And so each community needs to start really getting proactive and really moving forward with this enormous transition that needs to happen in our building sector. So in Burlington, we're looking at moving forward on a number of fronts around buildings. Burlington was one of the first communities to achieve 100% renewable in the electricity sector. And part of that is due to the fact that we have a municipally owned electric department, BED, Burlington Electric Department. And it's an electric department that over the decades has done a ton of work in efficiency. And so has been able to, making it easier to get off of fossil fuels because we've been able to reduce the overall demand for electricity and then replace that demand with renewable sources. But now we're looking at transportation and we're looking at buildings and the thermal sector. And within that thermal sector, we're looking at some ordinance changes that we can do around new buildings. As Mark mentioned, that should be the lowest hanging fruit and really a no-brainer, is that any new buildings coming in should start off with fossil-free infrastructure and should not be hooked up to the gas system, and also should not be heating with propane or oil or anything else. Let's make sure these new buildings are done right and are both efficient and are heated renewably. So we're looking at ordinances that would require the primary heating system for all new construction to be renewable or non-fossil. That's one ordinance that we're looking at moving forward, hopefully quickly. We're also working on and close to passing, I think, an ordinance around weatherizing rental units in Burlington, and the rental housing stock is over 60% of Burlington's housing stock. So doing energy efficiency retrofits in this massive portion of our housing stock will also help us as we transition away from fossil fuels for heating, to have these tighter building envelopes. And then finally, and I think the main thing that I was asked to discuss tonight was this charter change proposal that we're looking at. So actually changing what the city has the authority to do. In Massachusetts, a couple of communities tried to move forward on regulating thermal energy and were actually blocked by the state. And similarly here in Vermont, there's only so much we can do at the local level. So right now we're actually seeking greater authority at the local level to regulate buildings, specifically to accelerate the transition of buildings off of fossil fuels and towards electric thermal systems and other renewable forms of heating buildings and running appliances. So that's currently what's on the ballot. Next Tuesday in Burlington there's 2 ballot questions related to this. There's the charter change proposal, which would allow the city to regulate thermal energy systems in buildings for the purpose of reducing emissions. And then there is an advisory ballot question that would advise the city council to use that authority to create policies that specifically benefit low-income Burlingtonians, moderate-income Burlingtonians, and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the community. So there's kind of a climate justice element of this too, where we specifically want to ensure that these climate policies are benefiting folks, most vulnerable in our community as we move forward. So I think it's important to understand that this charter change around regulating buildings is just authorizing language. And so we don't know exactly what policy would flow from that if we get that authority. But we first need the authority to be able to do it. In the meantime, as I said, we're looking at focusing on new construction, which we do have a good amount of authority to regulate already. And so we're looking to move forward on that. So that's a bit of an overview of what's going on in Burlington and what's going to be on the ballot next Tuesday.
Thanks, Jack. If you don't mind me building on that for a moment, Steve and Rob, I just want to underscore, Jack, what you said at the beginning in terms of the urgency of moving forward on this. When you consider that we've got about 25 years, right, through 2045, 2050 at the latest, to eliminate climate pollution from our economy and move to a net zero economy, that's one full building cycle, right? So when you think about an investment in both appliances and building envelopes, that's about how often our built environment turns over. So from today onwards, essentially every single investment that we make in the built environment needs to be aligned with that net zero, fully electric, clean electric approach. So just as you're thinking about the urgency and why it's so important to move forward now, and that otherwise, if we miss an investment in a building, any building, we're going to have to go back and make a more expensive and costly retrofit down the road. So that's why it's so important, both on new construction, any new investment, any new appliance, any work on the envelope of the building needs to be in this overarching approach. Additionally, I think a lot of people, well, why not efficiency? Why not just weatherize homes? One of the challenges that we face is when you weatherize a home, you're actually tightening up that building envelope. You're keeping oftentimes more of that air is less leaky. That can actually exacerbate the indoor air quality problems and health problems associated with burning gas, fuel and propane inside a home. So it's not enough just to use efficiency or weatherize a home, because you can actually be exacerbating the health problems that come with burning gas inside our homes. So those are just some of the pieces to also, the importance of starting with affordable housing and low-income families, making sure that they're first in line for the benefits of these investments, which also will create a lot of jobs. We've done some great studies on the new jobs that are created for this comprehensive approach in buildings. It's going to require a massive investment that will lead to a lot of good job creation. So ensuring, one of the things that our neighbors in Massachusetts did, for instance, in a proposed weatherization retrofit bill, was require that any new public funding that's included in programs like this are associated with project labor agreements. So definitely something to look at both as we go forward, is how are we creating good jobs, quality jobs with these kind of programs. So just a couple of the importance of starting with affordable housing and low-income families is people start to switch off the gas system. There will be fewer and fewer customers paying for the sunk costs of gas infrastructure. And make no mistake, right? The gas companies are fighting this approach tooth and nail because they recognize that their business model is over. It's done. They are moving fuels through a pipeline system is not consistent with a net zero climate economy. It's not possible to, the gas companies will point to things like hydrogen or the so-called renewable natural gas, these fossil gas alternatives. They're not sustainable. They're far more expensive and limited. Even the gas industry itself had said, we can only replace about 6 to 13% of all the gas use in the economy with these other alternatives. Those alternatives, again, are more expensive, limited. They're not clean in many cases. Massachusetts, again, found that switching to these more expensive and limited fossil gas alternatives instead of electrifying would increase gas rates 2 or 3 times. So our customers can't afford that, particularly those, again, struggling with energy and housing costs. So it's really important that those struggling with those energy and housing costs are the first to switch off the system, so they're not stuck with the sunk, stranded assets that the gas companies are trying to force down people's throats. We're seeing across the country gas companies not just trying to hook new homes and buildings up to the gas system, but even to go in and replace outdated existing piping systems. We certainly need to end gas leaks, but the best way to do that is electrify an entire neighborhood and shut down the gas system altogether so that it's not leaking. So that's another approach to think about in terms of how to save people costs, how not to continue to create these stranded assets that are going to cost more and more, and why it's so important that we start with affordable housing, low-income families, and create good jobs in this process.
Yeah, that's a great point. Steve, can I bounce off that a little more?
Please do, yeah. Please do.
Okay. No, I think that's all a great point. And on the other side of that is as more buildings electrify and as our transportation system electrifies as well, that similarly will drive down electric rates, at least in Burlington, where we do have additional capacity on our current electric system to where we can add additional load over the same infrastructure. And so the cost per unit is going to go down for everyone. So as we switch more buildings over to electric, it pushes down electric rates for all electric users. So there's that benefit there. And then additionally, that money that's spent into our electric system remains local. The vast majority of that dollar remains local versus the money that's spent on natural gas. Most of that money flows out of the state of Vermont and out of the economy. So as Mark said, not only you're supporting local jobs in terms of the work that needs to be done to transition buildings, but then the ongoing fuel costs for decades and decades, that daily fuel use that is now circulating, the money spent on that fuel is now circulating locally that would have otherwise flowed out of the economy. And it's supporting local union workers who work for our electric department here in Burlington. So there's a lot of local economy benefits to this. And I think it's it's really important to frame it that way and to think about it that way, in the same way that we value local food in Vermont and our local food systems. Thinking about our energy systems and keeping that local, I think, is really important as well, and can benefit our economy immensely.
Thanks, Jack. Steve, we're going to keep riffing off for a few more minutes.
Okay.
One of the perfect point, Jack, on the recirculation of dollars in the economy as well. California certainly is moving forward with this as well. And the California Public Utilities Commission, the state regulators, just released a report in the last couple of weeks that found that electrifying the economy and both buildings and transportation would save the average ratepayer around $100 a month in energy costs. You just want to think about like how immense that is in terms of saving $100 a month on energy costs through electrification. It's just remarkable. And so it's definitely something we want to capture and make sure that those dollars again are put into clean, renewable electricity, solar. I saw there was a couple questions about solar, which I know we're not talking about in the chat, but happy to mention a few things there. The other side of this is we need to make sure these investments include grid interconnectivity. One of the really great benefits about hot water heat pumps in particular is that it's very flexible electric demand. It's very flexible load. That can be utilized to avoid the need for new electric capacity in the system. As Jack said, Burlington's got some space. And as we make this full transition, it's really important to make sure that we're taking advantage of those flexible load opportunities to manage the system most reliably. What we saw in Texas over the last few weeks is really important to emphasize. The gas system essentially it was the vast majority of the capacity and power capacity that was causing the blackouts in Texas, right? The gas, they couldn't get gas out of the ground, and all of the vast majority of gas that was needed for power plants was going into very inefficient homes and very inefficient gas appliances. So actually there were power plants that couldn't get gas because of how inefficient these homes were. If we had been on a more electric system with high efficiency cold climate heat pumps with weatherized homes and utilizing our fuels far more efficiently and using more electric. So the advantage of an electric heat pump, for instance, is up to 300, sometimes 400% efficient in terms of how it uses electricity. So it's far more efficient to use the gas to power plants and use that in heat pumps. So if we had a different system more reliant on wind and solar, we would have been far more reliable and resilient in the face of these extreme weather events. We were not just avoiding these extremes, we're also more reliable and resilient when they occur.
I do, since you mentioned heat pumps, Mark or Jack, and that seems to be such an important element when we're talking about our thermal energy. We heat it. That's where a lot of that gas or fossil fuel energy goes, is heating homes. What I hear a lot are questions that challenge how effective heat pumps are, especially as air source heat pumps in extreme conditions. I think our extreme conditions are a lot more extreme than Texas extreme conditions. So when temperatures drop below zero, will people always need a backup?
Great question, Steve. So one of the interesting things that people don't realize, especially about modern gas appliances, for instance, is heat pump or gas furnaces. Modern gas furnaces don't work when your electricity is out either. So it's not like the gas system is more reliable. What we saw with Merrimack Valley is when the gas system exploded, again, which it does on a frighteningly regular basis, they were out for months, right? Months and months without service. So the electric system, when it does go down, it's almost never out for that long. And it's usually a transmission problem that can be fixed and can be avoided with, for instance, battery technology that's rapidly growing. We actually saw the first battery systems clear in the New England capacity market, in the New England electric system just recently. So it's incredibly important that we keep the lights on and we move a more reliable, resilient electric system in this process. And again, in New England, because New England is so dependent on gas in the electric system as well, the best way to improve reliability and resilience is to actually expand wind and solar and increase our reliance on those resources and reduce our dependence on the gas system. ISO New England, again, the regional grid operator, has done studies of this and actually seen that more wind and solar in the system reduces our reliance on gas and actually makes for a more reliable system. So there's lots of different ways to make sure that the electricity stays on, but it is paramount regardless of what happens, whether you're reliant on a gas system or on clean electricity. It's imperative that we keep the lights on, and the best way to do that is more wind and solar and batteries.
I can jump into Steve, and I think part of your question, Steve, I think was about just the performance, especially of air source heat pumps in our climate, right? And
yes,
the fact that below certain temperatures, especially if there's not a great building envelope, some of the the air source heat pumps can struggle and be inefficient at extremely low temperatures. So I don't know if that's the issue you were raising, but that's
yes,
definitely one that I hear a lot. And I know that, and maybe Mark can speak to it more as well, but I know that ground source heat pumps are definitely more efficient in those scenarios. And then there are certain buildings where backup heating is necessary. But what we looked at in our ordinance, the ordinance that we're considering for new construction would be, we've written it, or it's drafted in such a way, or it's been discussed so far in such a way where it would be the primary heating source that would need to be electric. And our city team has calculated that accounts for about 65% of the emissions, even if you do have a fossil fuel backup. So there's certain buildings, there's certain scenarios, I think, where we might not be there yet, but there's so many buildings that need to make this transition. New buildings should just simply be built for the technology off of the bat. And then when we're talking about existing buildings, we do need to sort of prioritize the buildings that have that stronger envelope and that are more prepared, and then work our way through that as the technology continues to improve. So that's sort of how I look at it, but I'd love to hear if Mark has more on it.
Yeah, I also added in the chat a link to the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships website on cold climate air source heat pumps. You've heard me say cold climate air source heat pumps a few times. Just want to emphasize these are heat pumps that do operate very well and are certified to operate extremely efficiently at lower and lower temperatures. So it's important to make sure in Vermont that you're installing the right heat pump. That you are actually installing a cold climate heat pump that is more efficient at these lower temperatures. So they're widely available, and it's important that we're making sure that those are the technologies that are being installed.
and then there are some of the traditional fossil fuel organizations, companies who are doing that, and if they're doing it in Vermont, let's hope they know which ones they're using. They're using the right systems. We have a couple of questions about solar, so maybe we could pivot to that briefly and maybe come back to the other questions here about the ordinance and so on. But George Plum has asked about what's happened to more or less what's happened to the market with solar. It's really flattened out in Vermont. And Michael also has a question. Michael, do you want to clarify your question about solar?
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, in the last few weeks, or maybe the last few months, there's been no production of solar power on my house because the panels are covered with snow, and I can't get up there. It's the building is quite tall. So I was wondering whether there was any technology being developed that one could use a sort of feedback loop to warm these panels when you need to, so that the snow would slide off. Or I know there are coatings developed, mainly by MIT, which are basically one molecule thick and nothing sticks to it. I was wondering whether there's any work being done by research institutes or solar panel manufacturers to make these panels effective and usable in our kind of climate.
Jack or Mark, I know Mark, you put a resource link in the chat that addresses some of the emerging technology there.
Steve, I see Eric Bratstorm looking to respond to that, I think.
Eric, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Rob and I have a long history, and he may want to shut me off because I have had for at least 15 years a zero carbon footprint home, and have gone through at least 5 different heating systems over those 15 years, and basically I agree with what you have to say. And I think that new construction is the answer. It's very difficult to do what we want to do with existing construction. Not that it's impossible, but it's expensive. And a lot of that has to do with using architects which will save you money, not cost you money, to have a house that never costs you anything for utilities. And I am living proof of it. And about 10 years ago, the New York Times actually called us and asked us if they come to our house to take a look at it. And they did. And they spent 3 days here, and they called in the home section of the New York Times, they called the section exhausted. And there was so much work involved in making a zero carbon footprint home. This is 15 years ago. But since then, as you guys have talked about, it's much easier to do that, especially if you use an architect. And part of the solution to all this is in working to get communities and the state to adopt building codes that makes it so that this is all possible, because the amount of insulation, which we have R40 and R80, walls and ceilings or roof, which makes the house able to do that, because it's 12,000 square feet a house, and it still doesn't use much, if any, as far as a carbon footprint because of the insulation. And the net zero is very, very difficult to reach. We have worked to try to get the zero carbon, and we have never been able to reach it. We get close, but the key is to keep working at it. And electric vehicles and having charging places in your house and having lots of solar panels and have them so that they clear themselves, which is the key to it. Because in the winter, it's very difficult. And they do have a quick heating system that you can put on the bottom of your panels, especially the ones at the bottom of your house, to clear your panels, because that's where you need the heat, at the very bottom. And if you get those to get above freezing, the whole system will slide down, and it does. But you have to kind of install that. And it's a little more expensive, but it's really critical. And we have found that it works. But the cold climate heat pumps are also critical. And we have found that cold climate heat pumps, and not the air ones, but not the ground ones, but the air ones, are far, far, far more inexpensive to install in the first place. And they're easy to put around the house. We have, I think, 9 mini splits, and we seldom use more than 3 of them, no matter how cold it is out. We do have some backup with gas, and we have found that having a house that also uses an air system that brings in at least 30% air to your house constantly through a heat exchangers solves the problem with using some gas in the meantime. And eventually we would love to get rid of the gas, but I haven't been able to get that far yet. The thing that I talked to Rob about yesterday was concerning electric vehicles, which are the real problem. And to get people to want to go to electric vehicles. We've had electric vehicles for almost 10 years now, and we have plug-in places for them. But if you want to go any distance at all beyond your house, you have a problem. And everybody knows that. It's called range anxiety, I think they call it. And that's why more electric vehicles aren't bought, and they are kind of stagnant. But I think the car companies realize that that's going to end. But we have to get that range anxiety problem solved. And it's probably difficult. Otherwise, it would have been done before this. We have lots of way stations and other places along our interstates that are absolutely logical places to have fast charge, half hour and a cup of coffee, and you got a full charge. But they don't do it. And there's got to be reasons why Montpelier doesn't work at it. And I have no idea what it is. I'm sure Rob knows what the problem is, but it's still out there. But the insulation and the number of solar panels that you have is a key. And not everybody has a roof that faces the right direction or is going to build a new house to be able to put the number of solar panels you need to run your house. But there are always solar farms. And there are solar farms here in the Mad River Valley that you can join and get as many solar panels as you want. And people do it. My wife manages one for Neil's Bend in Waitsfield, and they are absolutely incredible. We have kept our until this year when Dottie started to heat her pool, we had zero electric bills for about 14 years.
Eric, thanks a lot for that. I want to ask you to hold off while we go to some other
I was
questions.
expecting Rob to shut me off, not you.
Well, he asked me to shut you off, so
Oh, okay.
I'll put that back on him.
Now, because I'm only halfway through.
I appreciate your perspective, Eric.
I'm only halfway through, but
I know that's why I understand
know that's
that.
why you're doing it. But
Well, Eric,
but
we got a lot of people here.
Huh?
You do see we have a lot of, we have 20 people on the line here.
I'm
So
sure. Okay.
yeah,
Well,
I appreciate, it's a great story, and people should check out Eric's house. He's done an amazing piece of work, and Rob put a link in the chat for the New York Times article he was referencing. I will add, George Plum asked about what's happened to the progress in Vermont with solar, and from my perspective, the Public Utility Commission is largely responsible for that because they've changed the rules. They've changed the rates basically for net metering, which pushed a lot of the development of solar in Vermont. And now it's much tougher to make it cost effective for somebody to do it and get their paybacks in the times they need, and basically to have for a while there, the net metering returns basically allowed you to break even on your switch to solar, and that's no longer possible for most people. But we're working on that, and we're hoping that there are opportunities to do that. But I think that right now, I think our state has other priorities for change. Jack Cushman, you had a question.
Yes, I do, Steve. Thank you. And thanks to our guests. This is, and our other participants. This is really a very interesting conversation. And I know that there are municipal buildings all over the state. There are towns with municipal buildings that need to get off their fossil fuel boiler systems. And I would just remark that one selling point for doing that is you have an opportunity to improve the building ventilation and to turn it into a healthy building vis-a-vis COVID, not just vis-a-vis conventional Clean Air Act pollutants. My question for you all is, how can communities around Vermont put together shovel-ready projects, so to speak, in the event that there's an infrastructure bill coming down the pike that would have substantial green energy components to it? I'm afraid that this infrastructure bill is going to come along and many communities will be unprepared to get in line, just like lots of small businesses were unprepared for the COVID relief that Congress supplied. Are there steps that can be taken now to catch that wave?
Absolutely, Jack. It's a perfect question. Two things I'd recommend. So again, one, the state legislature is looking at these same issues. And so I think it's important to support them in that process and get, kind of new comprehensive one-stop shop programs set up as quickly as possible. I think the other thing to emphasize is working with the community action agencies who currently do a lot of the weatherization work around the country and in our communities right now. So definitely would recommend reaching out to the community action agencies. Usually they've got a list of projects, that either they haven't been able to get to for some reason, or just the general list of projects that they're working towards. So connecting up with the community action agencies in the state is the way I'd approach that. Jack.
Yeah, and I would say on the weatherization front, especially, it's a big priority for the state and a big priority in Burlington, and it's really the biggest bottleneck. And especially as we advance policy that pushes weatherization more rapidly, the biggest bottleneck is really increasingly the workforce side of it, and not having enough workers that are trained in weatherization. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges around getting the weatherization work done that we need to get done, is we need to train more Vermonters in this type of work, and ensure that the wages are high enough that folks actually want to do it, because people trained to work in buildings can often find similarly paying work to weatherization that might be slightly more attractive than being in an attic or in a basement doing this difficult weatherization work. So I think providing resources to ensure that these are highly paid jobs, and then also putting more resources towards that job training and apprenticeship opportunities to really build our weatherization workforce is going to be the biggest ways that we can unlock this.
Yeah, and weatherization is, this room that you see me sitting in was unfinished basement space. And when I had bookshelves and so on put in, we had some insulation put in the walls at the suggestion of Efficiency Vermont. And my fuel oil bill went down by almost half just by that one step. I mean, tremendous payoff of insulating the basement in this house that we had only recently moved into. And that will finance future steps to move, on the science timetable toward having zero carbon footprint here, because, that's money available for the next step from the simplest possible thing that we could have done.
Right. And there was an analysis by the state of different decarbonization measures, and weatherization was one of the most cost effective. It actually, it more than paid for itself. So it was kind of cost positive compared to some of the other decarbonization measures that did cost a little bit. So I think it's a slam dunk in so many ways. And so I do think this workforce challenge needs to be addressed, and we need to put more resources towards that.
I think one of the things that I have heard suggested about that issue of developing that workforce is sustainability. It's one thing if you have a one big shot of funds into say a weatherization programs, like what happened 10 years ago with the ERA funding. that was around, but that disappeared. And with that, a lot of investment in workforce development disappeared. So if we can figure out, rather than go in fits and starts, which we've always done with solar, with weatherization, with all these things, if we could figure out how to do something on a sustainable basis and make a really strong commitment to that. I am personally kind of hopeful that with the Global Warming Solutions Act that's being implemented right now, and we develop a serious carbon reduction plan over the years, that will be an outcome, because otherwise we won't get there. Let's see, I'm scanning for questions here. Suzanne, do you want to, you've put a couple of questions in. Do you want to pick up on one of your questions?
Okay, there we go. I apologize for that. So my question is that Burlington is filled with, have there any studies been done about what retrofitting will do to older buildings? With Burlington being filled with Victorian houses and post-war houses, a lot of rental units, a lot of quick turnover, a lot of neglect. As Steve and Rob know, I've been doing extensive stuff on my apartment, and I know that if retrofitting to get rid of all the gas heat, all the gas would seriously degrade the structural integrity. Painting the walls and patching holes is making drywall fall down. So what kind of studies have been done? And if anything has been done, what about displacement? Because I think massive projects like this, gutting a building, replacing things, will either condemn them or displace for lengthy times. And I just quickly viewed the Boston zoning committee about that Mark sent me, and there's nothing, if there's no buildings to house people, there are no buildings to house people. So just thinking along those lines. Just what a cost analysis would be and what is that problem? Because I really think that if my building was to be retrofitted, it would be condemned or it would need to have serious lengthy repairs. And I'm not the only one in Burlington with a building like this. That was lengthy, sorry.
When you say retrofit, Suzanne, are you talking about weatherization or?
Yeah.
Oh no, for electrifying, putting everything to electric heat, everything to electric stove. Sorry, I did not make that clear.
Okay, yeah. Maybe Mark can speak to that. Mark, you had replied in the chat, but I'll let Mark take that one.
Yeah, and I also included, Suzanne, just now, a fresh off the presses pocket guide to electrification retrofits that might also be useful to take a look through.
Okay.
As I mentioned, the Boston is working through a building performance standard right now. Very similar. I know, Burlington's been involved in discussions of building performance standards, as have other states across the country. And the Boston program does include protections from displacement in particular, and that's something we advocate for in any of these policies. And so definitely, I'll see if I can highlight just a few of the exact components of it. But it does include, right of first refusal, right to stay if you're talking about a condo, mandatory notice rights, continued investment in housing. We have talked with some of the state agencies, though, that we've been working with across the country. And in some cases, they point out, look, it might actually be cheaper just to build somebody a new home, even than to do all of this, depending on just like how, for instance, the health and safety repairs that may be associated with a particular home. And that's something we've got to consider as we look forward in terms of, are there times we just need to build new housing and make sure, again, that is all electric, as this policy being considered in Vermont would do, or in Burlington would do.
And that's very true, but then you get into the issue of historical ordinances and keeping the Vermont aesthetic. Because if you've ever read Burlington zoning law, there's some pretty strict guidelines about new building, what can it be done, things like that, especially if you're in a community. Or like I live on South Willard, which is very much aesthetically pleasing, but the buildings are crap. So it's a big can. I was just wondering if there's any studies, because it's a giant can of worms that potentially can be opened, but very interesting.
No, I agree. I don't know that there has been any Burlington specific studies done, but it's a great point. What's that?
I just know Burlington. That's why I'm just referencing it. I know.
No, there's a lot of old buildings and there's a lot of degraded buildings. And so I do think a lot of this stuff is going to kind of open somewhat of a can of worms. And I do think it's going to create a tension with the historic preservation side of things. So that's going to be an interesting sort of debate and discussion, is what do we value more? Because in certain places it is going to come into conflict, I think, between preserving the historic value of something versus getting it up to these efficiency standards that we would want to see. So that's going to play out for sure.
And how does one get involved in this?
Yeah, well, that's a great. That's a great.
Find a city councilor.
Yeah, that's a great question. We always love to hear that. Well, yeah, I would be happy to connect with you offline and let you know where things are at on these various policies. Just to kind of review, the weatherization policy, that one, we just passed that out of the ordinance committee. It's going to the full city council in March. And so I'm happy to connect with you offline, but there's opportunity to get involved and speak with city councilors and make your voice heard on that issue, and just track, the final policy as we work through trying to pass it at the city council level. And then it'll move into the implementation phase after that. And then in terms of these ballot items, I can drop a link to, there is a website that regarding the ballot items 3 and 7, btvyeson3.org. I can drop that, and there's ways to get involved. That would really just kind of be over the next 6 days before before town meeting day, before we vote. But yeah, feel free to connect with me, and I'd love to get you plugged into some of these discussions and these policy debates.
I see that Beth Sachs has made a couple of comments about this, and she's in Burlington, been following these issues in Burlington and statewide for forever. So I wonder if she would like to add to this. Beth, are you?
So I apologize because I had to do another thing before, so I missed the first half hour, but I was wondering if you had talked about the ordinance, which I thought was going to be what you were going to mostly talk about tonight. Is that right?
Yeah, Jack gave an intro earlier.
Okay.
We talked a little bit about, well, there's the charter change proposal,
Right.
And then there's, separate from that, there's a couple of ordinance proposals that are related that we've kind of been talking about as well to some
Right.
extent. But
So
we've
I
also
think-
been just speaking more generally about the
Right.
topic.
So I think for me, just some of the issues are that from what I've been listening to is, for one thing, I really think, Jack, it's absolutely true that we have to stop burning fossil fuels, period. But we also can't, while we're doing that, we're adding load to the grid enormously with heat pumps and electric cars. And we have to, I think, get serious about how we're going to define renewables. Even Burlington, I think, buys from Hydro-Quebec, and I don't consider Hydro-Quebec a renewable energy source or an ethical renewable energy source anyway. And I think that's an issue that I think we need to think about. I also am not aware from the discussions that you were just having about this labor shortage. I mean, the weatherization program is talking at state level about adding $25 million. And the weatherization programs that are in the community action agencies, I haven't heard anything from them about having trouble hiring people for the weatherization work that they're doing now. So I just wonder where that's coming from.
So I've been involved for the last couple of years with talking to Vermont Gas and Burlington Electric Department, and they've been collaborating and running programs around weatherization, and that's mostly where I've been hearing about the labor shortage issues and the wait time. And in many cases, there's, like for CVOEO, for their subsidization of weatherization, there's often very long wait times, and I'm told it's because of the workforce shortage. But that's interesting that maybe it's different with some of the other community action agencies than CVOEO.
Maybe there's been a many year waiting list in at least 2 or 3 of the weatherization agencies, but I've been working on this for about 40 years. I've never heard it mentioned that the labor was the problem. The problem was the money, because it's just, weatherization money only comes from, it used to only come from the federal government. Now none of it comes from that. It comes from the gross receipts tax at the state level, and and Burlington Electric and Efficiency Vermont and Vermont Gas. I mean, that's it. So that's limited. I mean, nobody pays for low-income weatherization. I mean, the recipients don't. So I have never heard that the waiting list is due to a labor problem.
Yeah. So, and like I said, these conversations we've been having have been specific to this policy proposal of mandating weatherization of rental units in Burlington. And so, given the fact that there are thousands of rental units that would have to comply with this and would need to be weatherized, adding in thousands of units to the queue, what we're hearing from these players is that much additional demand for weatherization services is far greater than what today's workforce could take on. So maybe it's more specific to this massive increase in demand that we're talking about.
It might be, but as Steve mentioned, I think it was Steve or Rob, back during the hour days, we trained hundreds of weatherization workers in Vermont, and then there were no jobs, which was just a stupid way to run a job training program. But I don't know that there was a shortage of people to train then, working with, organizations like, I forgot what it's called, Youth Build and Vermont Works for Women. They were all running training programs. Vermont Technical College had a good one, a big one.
Beth, I'm gonna interrupt because Mark has to run along here, and we can keep going for a little while. But I just wanted to say thank you to Mark for joining us tonight, and to Jack, of course. But I think Mark has to jump off. So if people have further questions for Mark, then I'm pretty sure you can reach him through Rob or myself.
Take care,
Mark.
Well,
Thanks,
Beth, I hope you're right. I hope that it sort of resolves itself, and that as we have this new increase in demand for weatherization work, that we can easily train up new folks to do that work. I hope that that's the case, but I think we need to be proactive about it to make sure that that does happen.
And I just want to, I know that I support the ordinance, I mean, the charter change, both of them. And I just want to, I don't want you to lose sight of the ordinance. I wrote an ordinance 28 years ago that was passed in Burlington. It was one of the last energy kind of ordinances passed, even in the country, about which was the rental energy ordinance. And it wasn't an energy ordinance as much it was as an equity ordinance, because rental property was just, and still is, mostly in terrible shape, and renters can't do it, and property owners don't want to. So it was a way to force that to happen. So yeah, we would much have preferred having it be a time of sale ordinance anytime any property changed hands. But we couldn't, it was a negotiated settlement with the Apartment Owners Association and Gene Richards back then. So, I learned a lot about how we passed that, what we needed to do to pass that. And I would be happy to talk to you about that anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that time of sale. So you're talking about the time of sale ordinance?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the model and the foundation for this new universal mandatory rental weatherization policy, was basically taking that ordinance that around when a rental property is sold and changes owners, and you have to do efficiency upgrades at that point. But we took a lot of that language and that structure, but we basically now just say that every rental property in the city, regardless of when it's changing hands, has to comply. And we're going to roll that out on a timeline. It's not going to be everyone right from day one. But so I think we're hopefully completing what many of you all wanted to do with this back then, of taking it to that next step versus just at the
And
time. So
technically too, I mean, we considered that a new floor for energy efficiency. You couldn't get any lower than that. And we did that in order to pass it, assuming that the city council would from then on ramp it up year after, not year after year, but period after period. And that never, ever happened, not once.
yeah.
So it's an energy efficiency floor that's really terrible. It's nowhere near enough. And that's
Yeah, well, it's
28
really a
years later.
shame. Yeah, it's really a shame that there's been such a lag time, and that policy was never updated until this point. And at least the good thing is we are jumping.
Yep.
It is a big jump that we're doing now, but really it would have been better to just keep building off of that, like you said, year after year,
Right.
versus trying to make the full leap, quickly right now, which is what we're doing.
Right, but it's time to do it, that's for sure.
Yeah, but it's really great, chatting to you and or chatting with you about it, and let's definitely talk about it more, given your history of work on it.
So I want to add one more thing. Beth, you questioned about what's happening in the state around weatherization. Right now, Senator Bray has having hearings within the Natural Resources Committee around the weatherization program. And one of the questions keeps coming up about long-term sustainability of a program. The governor in his budget address announced $25 million towards weatherization programs, but that's one-time money. And it's not for a sustainable program. So even if they committed all that money towards weatherization right now, it's gone. And then everybody we trained is not utilized because there's no money for the program. I know that's something Senator Bray is looking at doing and following along more than just let's just do a one-time thing around weatherization. So that'll be something helpful for Burlington. But I just wanted to fill in that question.
Yeah.
That is being looked at.
I mean, we looked at, a few years ago, we looked at how much it would cost to meet the requirement that the state passed like 10 years ago or 8 years ago, which was, I think, 40,000 homes brought to, do you remember that? And it was, the deadline was 2025. So it was, I can't remember when it was. You guys,
Yep.
Steve, you've been around long enough.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but we're a fraction of the way.
We're a fraction of the way. And we estimated the cost of that at, I think, $800 million. So, and that's a drop in the bucket because one, it only talked about a 20% decrease in energy use, which is really ridiculous to think about right now. If you're going to go weatherized homes, you do not want to aim so low at 20%. That's just not going to cut it. So I think that there's a lot that it's never, somehow there's going to have to be financing. And I know that it's really unpopular to say this, but I think anybody who can save more than they're paying after they do their weatherization could contribute back into that fund.
Well, if you could get a startup fund to go into financing and then finance things over the lifetime of the improvements, those improvements are going to be around for decades.
Right. Remember, it was
so if you can pay them back, and I think that's one of the inherent features of something like on-bill financing.
Yes.
Which means, for those who aren't familiar, it means incorporating the cost of improvements, more or less using your utility company as your bank, and paying on your bill to and your payments, if the term is long enough, are going to be less than the money you're saving.
Yeah, and that needs to, the term is what's really critical. Even the interest rate doesn't matter. We ran one of these, when we started VEIC 34 years ago for Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And as long as you have a term that's as long as the life of the measure, you will definitely save more than you're going to pay. But if you have to do these loans in like 3 or 5 year loans, it's not fair. It can't compete with coal or nuclear. They get 50 years or however long they get to amortize their costs. And
as Eric said,
he looked at the same way.
As I think, Eric, you made the point that the way I would put it is that anything new that's not net zero is a retrofit waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And that can be financed easily on the lifetime of the building. Eric, back to you, Eric.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that what we see, am I on or am I?
You're on.
Okay, is what Greta said about a year ago to in Switzerland. He said, "This is not a one-time thing. This is our entire future. There is no planet B, and that is the bottom line." And I think we forget about that. In fact, it hasn't been mentioned tonight that is the real bottom line. It's really nice to be able to pay for something with the savings, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And but the real thing is our children, and that we are doing the right thing for our planet. That I think that's the bottom line, the real bottom line.
Certainly. It certainly is. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as we see more stories like California last year and Texas, last year and this year, and Australia and South Africa and the droughts that happened in as long as we start seeing more of those and that side of the story becomes real, then these measures that we can take now will seem pretty small in retrospect.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's just the cost of inaction is so enormous that we have no other option, like Eric said, and it's not if, but it's how. And I think we need to get more folks in that mindset of not if, but how, because there's a lot of folks, I think, that will shoot down a lot of these ideas and policy proposals, but without an alternative. And that shouldn't be acceptable. You know, if we want to debate how we're going to get there, that's totally fair, but it can't be a question of if we're going to do this or not, if we're going to move off of fossil fuels. And I do have to jump off in a minute, but Rob had messaged me to just maybe summarize the ballot questions again. Would that be helpful for people if I just quickly summarize that again?
Great for all Burlington voters.
Yeah, so because we've been talking about a lot of different topics, which is great, and we've had a lot of knowledge in the room and history, and you know, there's several different policy proposals, even in Burlington alone. But just to give one more quick recap of the ballot items in particular in this charter change proposal, what this is, it's a charter change that would allow the city to regulate thermal energy systems in buildings, not only new construction, but existing buildings, residential and commercial, in order to reduce emissions, including the ability to assess a carbon impact fee as well. So it's an authorizing language and giving the city new authority to create policy. We don't know exactly what that policy is going to be, but right now the city doesn't have the authority to do it. And so that's what we're seeking through this charter change. And that's question 3 on the ballot. And then question 7 on the ballot is laying out the framework of, if we do get this authority and we start to develop policies to move buildings off of fossil fuels, that we do this in a way that prioritizes and benefits low and moderate income Burlingtonians and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the community. So to ensure that those who've been historically and who are currently marginalized are the ones receiving the most benefits from these policies. So those are the 2 ballot questions, and I really hope that folks will vote yes and allow us to move forward on this.
Great, thanks, Jack. Rob, do you want to wrap things up?
Yes, thank you very much, Jack, for joining us, and we appreciate it. And good luck with the city ordinance and ballot initiatives. We hope to see a lot of good progress on that coming along the way.